Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yet today, our mission is to explore really one of the most timeless, high-stakes tug-of-wars in the human experience.
Oh, absolutely.
It's that fundamental tension between our desire for freedom and, our desire for safety.
Right. You see this tension in the news every day. You feel it in your communities.
Exactly. And today, we are going to look at the invisible forces driving it. Our grounding source for this exploration is a 2023 Spanish academic collection. It's titled The Tension Between Liberty and Security, a Socio-Legal Approach.
Published by the University of La Rioja, right?
Yes, and coordinated by Maria Jose Bermúdez Benítez and Ana Isabel Perez Cepeda.
Yeah.
It is a dense, really multidisciplinary text that looks at law, sociology, and philosophy to explain what is happening to the structure of our modern world.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does. And before we get into the theoretical framework, there is a visual hook right at the beginning of this source material that I really want to describe for you.
Yeah, the cover image.
Right. It's a rather striking photograph. You are looking up at the iconic hand and golden torch of the Statue of Liberty against this bright blue sky with white clouds.
But there's a catch.
Yeah, the entire foreground, completely blocking your view, is this stark, black, tangled mess of barbed wire.
It is a heavy image. And honestly, looking at the notes on this collection, it's an ideal visual metaphor to encapsulate the core question of the entire text.
Which is?
Well, that single photograph forces you to ask yourself, how much liberty are you willing to trade for what level of security? And what is the actual price you are paying for that trade?
It captures that very human instinct to build a barrier, right?
Yeah.
Trying to keep the bad things out while inadvertently fencing ourselves in.
Exactly.
That is the paradox we are going to explore today. Our roadmap for this deep dive looks like this. We will start by walking you through what the research calls the risk society, and this utopian illusion we seem to have developed about absolute safety.
Then we will trace the historical evolution of the modern state. Basically how we moved from a welfare model to a security state.
And finally, we will zoom out and look at the deep philosophical reasons why treating security and liberty as opposing forces might actually be our biggest mistake as a society.
It's a great journey.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this idea of a utopia of total security.
Right.
The opening of the collection tackles this modern demand we all seem to have for a completely hazard-free life.
Yeah, the authors argue that this demand is, at its core, a utopian cliche. I mean, we live in a highly complex, globally interconnected modern world. Trying to eliminate all danger is mathematically and practically impossible.
But society continues to operate as if zero risk is an achievable goal.
Exactly. We expect guarantees. We expect absolute safety in our persons, our property, and our daily routines. But the text points out that demanding total security in a chaotic world is just a fool's errand.
And worse, attempting to enforce that impossibility carries a massive societal cost.
Huge cost.
But hold on, isn't being aware of risks a good thing? It seems like a basic survival instinct. How do the authors distinguish between, say, a healthy level of caution and this impossible demand for total security?
The distinction lies in how the fear is manufactured and sustained. The research details a critical cycle, heavily referencing sociologists who describe modern fear as self-propelling.
Self-propelling?
Yeah, it's not just about noticing a lion in the grass anymore. It's about a systemic culture of anxiety. The mass media constantly amplifies potential risks, often dramatizing them.
Which creates a pervasive, subjective feeling of insecurity in the public.
Precisely.
I think everyone listening can relate to that feeling. You pick up your phone, you scroll through your news feed, and it feels like you are navigating a minefield of potential disasters. Everything is framed as a crisis.
And consider what happens when you feel constantly insecure. You demand protection. You demand that authorities step in and do something, anything really, to eliminate the risk.
That creates a feedback loop.
Exactly. Fear demands action. Action often involves restricting civil liberties to provide the public with a tangible sense of control. And then the media reports on the new restrictions alongside whatever lingering threats remain.
Which just fuels the cycle all over again.
You are never actually made perfectly safe, but you are made continuously afraid.
Which leads to a massive paradigm shift in how society operates at a fundamental level. The collection features an analysis drawing on the concept of the risk society by Ulrich Beck.
Right, analyzed by David San Martin Segura in the text.
The way the authors frame this shift clarifies so much about modern political discourse.
What's fascinating here is how the text contrasts our modern era with the industrial society of the past. If you look back at the traditional industrial class society, its driving force could be summarized by the phrase, "I am hungry."
I am hungry.
Yes, it was a society driven by a demand for equality, for a fair share of the wealth, resources, and labor rights. The political friction was all about distribution.
But the driving force of the modern risk society has completely shifted.
Exactly. The defining phrase is now, "I am afraid."
I am hungry versus I am afraid.
Yeah.
So the primary demand of the public is no longer equality. It is security.
That's it. The entire system of values that structures our political and social lives has been reordered around managing, calculating, and avoiding risk. When a society's primary motivator shifts from seeking equality to seeking safety, the way citizens view each other changes dramatically.
The text notes that this is where things take a dark turn. In this risk society, we stop viewing other people as fellow citizens who we share a collective responsibility for.
Right.
Instead, anyone who poses a potential risk, whether real or perceived, is viewed as a monster or an inherent threat to the social order. We start creating distinct categories of people who are deemed inherently dangerous.
Which brings us to a very controversial legal and social concept discussed in the book, The Criminal Law of the Enemy.
Right.
Traditionally, criminal law is built on a foundation of constitutional guarantees. You have the presumption of innocence, the right to a fair trial, and you are punished for a specific act you actually committed.
But the criminal law of the enemy is a framework where society willingly strips those fundamental rights away from certain people.
Because they are classified as enemies of the state or the social order, the focus shifts from punishing a past crime to neutralizing a future threat. Preventative detention, mass surveillance, suspended due process. These become acceptable tools.
And the profound societal naivety highlighted here is that everyday people willingly surrender these rights. They support harsh, overreaching laws because they assume only the bad guys will be targeted.
Yeah, the internal logic is usually, well, I'm not a terrorist and I'm not a criminal, so giving the state more power to surveil or detain people doesn't affect me.
But the authors issue a massive reality check on that kind of thinking. You cannot build a legal system that structurally strips rights from a designated other without inevitably putting your own rights at risk.
Because the definition of who the other is, or who constitutes an enemy, is completely malleable. It can always be expanded by whoever holds power. The source material poignantly warns, we are the others.
Really others.
The assumption that you are permanently safe from the arbitrary use of state power is a dangerous illusion. When you dismantle constitutional guarantees for the promise of safety, you are dismantling the very mechanisms designed to protect you from tyranny.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because to understand how we got to a place where we are willing to trade those rights, we have to look at how the state itself has mutated over time.
Yes, the essay by Jose Maria Martinez de Pison.
Right. The text provides a deep historical context for this. The very nature of what a government is supposed to do, its primary reason for existing, has shifted dramatically over the centuries.
If we look at the historical timeline provided by the research, the modern state emerged in the 17th century, theorized by thinkers like Hobbes and Locke. At that time, it was primarily an entity for basic protection.
The social contract was simple. You give up some of your natural wild freedom to a sovereign authority.
And in exchange, that authority protects your life and your property from violence.
Then fast forward to the 20th century, and we see the rise of the welfare state.
Yes. The goal of the state was still security, but the definition of security broadened. It was achieved through social equality, the redistribution of wealth, and providing a comprehensive safety net.
Think public health care, accessible education, unemployment benefits, and pensions.
Exactly. The underlying philosophy was that a society is most secure when its citizens' basic human needs are reliably met. A population that isn't desperate is a population that is inherently more stable and safe.
Now, regarding this next phase of evolution, I need to pause for just a second. We are exploring the specific socio-political arguments made by the authors of this source material. We are not taking any political sides here.
Absolutely. We're just outlining their analysis.
Right. Regardless of where you, the listener, might fall on the political spectrum, the authors make a specific critique of certain ideologies here. They argue that in recent decades, we have shifted away from that welfare state model and moved towards what they call the security state.
And they attribute this shift directly to neoliberal political philosophies.
Right. The text specifically points to thinkers like Robert Nozick and F.A. Hayek, who advocated for a highly minimal state.
The author's argument is that as governments deliberately shrink their social welfare programs, privatize public services, and reduce their interventions in the economy, they inevitably lose their traditional justification for holding power.
If the state is no longer providing a robust social safety net or guaranteeing a baseline of economic well-being, why does it exist?
Exactly. Its primary, almost exclusive justification narrows down to providing physical security and policing. The state transitions from being a provider of social well-being to a manager of risks and a punisher of deviations.
And to manage those risks, the research shows that this new security state relies heavily on the normalization of exception. The authors look at post-9/11 laws, like the Patriot Act in the United States, as well as tightening immigration policies across Europe and around the world.
The argument is that governments use the specter of internal enemies to pass exceptional, highly restrictive legislation.
The critique leveled by the authors is that narratives like the war on terror or the threat of uncontrolled immigration are utilized to legitimize a systematic rollback of democratic freedoms.
They normalize a permanent state of exception. Emergency measures that restrict civil liberties, bypass traditional judicial oversight, or implement mass warrantless surveillance are initially introduced as temporary, desperate necessities.
But over time, they quietly become permanent fixtures of the legal landscape.
Because the justification is always the imminent safety of the public. But the tangible result is a systemic erosion of the rule of law and individual privacy.
That leads to another detail the text brings up that really reframes the whole issue. Security is big business. It has become a highly profitable global market. Furthermore, it is a guaranteed electoral slogan.
Right. Politicians across the entire political spectrum promise security because, simply put, fear wins votes.
And when security becomes a commodity, a product you can buy in the open market, it fundamentally changes the architecture of society.
It creates a deep structural inequality. If safety is a commodity, then your level of security depends directly on your ability to pay for it.
Think about that for a second. The text mentions gated communities, right?
Yes.
If you have to buy your safety, what does that make the police? What does that do to the social contract?
The authors argue it completely fractures the idea of a shared social contract. The wealthy can afford private security firms, fortified gated communities, and advanced personal surveillance systems.
They can effectively insulate themselves from the risks of the world.
Meanwhile, those who cannot afford these private measures are left to rely on a state apparatus that is increasingly focused on policing, surveillance, and punishment rather than social support.
It turns security into an exclusive privilege rather than a fundamental human right.
The state apparatus shifts from protecting everyone equally to essentially managing and controlling the populations who can't afford private safety.
So what does this all mean? We have talked about the mechanics of the risk society, the self-propelling culture of fear, and the historical rise of the security state. But let's zoom out and look at the philosophy behind all of this.
Jose Maria Aguirre Ora's essay tackles this.
Right. The collection asks us to fundamentally rethink how we define liberty and its relationship to our basic human rights.
The author leans on a concept called phenomenology, mentioning thinkers like Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty.
Okay, without getting bogged down in the academic weeds, phenomenology is essentially this study of how we actually experience reality.
Yes. The text uses these thinkers to explain the concept of situated freedom. This is crucial because freedom isn't some absolute magical force field floating in a void.
Right.
It is not the ability to do absolutely anything you want without any consequences or physical limitations.
I really appreciated how the text grounded that idea. Could you give us an everyday breakdown of what situated freedom actually looks like for the listener?
Think of it like being dealt a hand of cards in a game. You don't get to choose the cards you're dealt. You are born into a specific physical world with a specific history, a certain social class, a genetic makeup, and a set of economic conditions.
That is your situation.
Right. But despite those very real constraints, you are fundamentally a project moving toward the future. You have the agency to decide how you play those cards.
You have the capacity to act upon your situation, make choices, and shape your destiny.
Exactly. You aren't purely a robotic product of your environment, but you aren't totally disconnected from its physical realities either. Your freedom is deeply tied to your specific situation.
I love that framing. It acknowledges reality without stripping away human agency.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the essay introduces the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, specifically his categorical imperative.
Okay.
Kant argued that humanity must always be treated as an end in itself, never merely as a means to an end. This is a foundational ethical principle for how a just society should operate.
Let's bridge that gap for a moment. How does that philosophical principle apply directly to the modern security state we were just discussing?
Think about mass surveillance. When a government decides to surveil millions of innocent citizens, vacuuming up their private data and communications just on the off chance they might find one criminal or terrorist, they are violating that principle.
The state is using those millions of innocent people merely as tools.
As a means to achieve the abstract goal of social order. It is treating human beings as data points to be mined, rather than as autonomous individuals with inherent rights.
According to the text, any system that strips people of their freedoms simply to achieve order violates the very core of what it means to be human.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate thesis of this section of the text. Organizing a society should never be about sacrificing people on the altar of order. True security cannot exist without freedom.
In fact, the text drops this profound conclusion: security is liberty.
Security is liberty. It is a brilliant inversion of the metaphor we always use. We usually think of freedom and security on a seesaw. If you want more weight on the security side, you inherently have to take weight off the freedom side.
But the author argues that a society built on submission, pervasive fear, and the loss of individual rights is inherently insecure.
If you are constantly surveilled, if your rights can be arbitrarily suspended by the state in the name of an emergency, you are not genuinely secure.
No, you are just living under the threat of state coercion rather than the threat of a criminal.
It redefines what safety actually feels like.
True security must be based on the legal, practical, and everyday promotion of human freedom. A society is only truly safe when its citizens are free to live, think, and participate in the public square without the constant looming threat of state intervention.
And to wrap up this philosophical perspective, the text touches on chaos theory. It suggests that order and disorder are practically inseparable forces in nature.
We have this modern technological obsession with trying to mathematically calculate, predict, and eliminate every single risk in human behavior.
But the text suggests that is an illusion.
The belief that legislation and algorithms can somehow create a zero-risk society is a dangerous myth. The text suggests that a truly free, mature society must accept a certain baseline level of unpredictability and chaos.
Because human life is inherently uncertain.
Navigating that uncertainty is a hallmark of a mature civilization. Rather than crushing all civil liberties in a futile attempt to prevent the unpreventable, a healthy society learns to manage that uncertainty while fiercely protecting its foundational freedoms.
Attempting to eradicate all disorder usually just results in a different, more oppressive kind of disaster.
A sterile authoritarian control that suffocates the very life it claims to protect.
Let's bring all of this together. On this deep dive into the source material, we've gone from the very real anxieties of our modern world to the philosophical foundations of human rights.
It's quite a journey.
You've explored how our modern obsession with risk and our self-propelling fear are actively reshaping the very nature of the state. We've traced how the state has transformed from a provider of social welfare into an enforcer of security.
And how that transformation often comes at the heavy cost of our personal liberties, fracturing our shared social contract.
We've also seen how philosophers remind us that you simply cannot have true security if you don't have freedom.
This raises an important question for you to consider as you go about your day.
Yes.
The next time you are scrolling through your phone and you see a news headline clearly designed to make you afraid, or the next time you hear a politician promise you absolute safety in exchange for just a little more surveillance or a few fewer rights.
Stop and ask yourself,
Are you being sold a utopian illusion? Is the absolute safety they are promising mathematically or practically possible? And most importantly, who is actually paying the price for that illusion of control?
I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over on your own. It builds on the source's discussion of vulnerability and chaos. We've established that the obsessive drive for absolute security inevitably creates a society of absolute surveillance and control. So, if trying to eliminate all risk costs us our freedom, might the ultimate act of preserving our humanity actually be learning how to comfortably and bravely coexist with our own vulnerability?
That is something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it gave you some aha moments and a new lens to view the world. Keep reading, keep listening, and most importantly, keep questioning the world around you.